With less than a month left until Korean voters head to the polls to elect their 19th president, now is the time to check where the presidential candidates stand on different issues. On this week's Upfront, we take a look at each candidate and examine his or her policy pledges, especially regarding diplomacy and national security.
Moon Jae-in, a close ally of late President Roh Moo-hyun and his second-time presidential contender since the 2012 election. Ahn Cheol-soo, a former medical doctor and a software mogul. Joon-pyo, a former prosecutor turned politician and provincial governor. Shim, a four-term lawmaker with extensive experience in defense and policy research. Sang-jung, a progressive liberal and a seasoned labor rights activist. The nominees from Korea's major political parties are now in place for next month's presidential election. The five presidential candidates have vowed to bring change to Korea. The prolonged leadership vacuum following the political scandal and impeachment of the former president has left a myriad of issues to be resolved. But in particular, a lot of eyes are on the candidates' approaches to foreign policy and national security amid North Korea's repeated nuclear and missile provocations and rapidly changing dynamics. South Korea's next president will have to play a major role in handling diplomacy with neighboring countries and countering North Korea's nuclear threat. On this week's Upfront, we review the presidential candidates' stances on diplomacy and security that are considered the highlights of policy pledges.
For today's discussion, we are joined by two experts. Let's welcome Cho Jung-hun, professor of the Graduate School of International Studies at Ajou University.
Thank you for having me.
And Lee Seong-hyon, research fellow at the Sejong Institute.
Well, pleasure to be here.
Let's start with the political inclinations and backgrounds of the five candidates. Now, Moon Jae-in of the Minju Party is touted as political heir to the late former President Roh Moo-hyun. This is his second time running in the election after the 2012 presidential election, right?
That's right. He has served as a chief of staff during the Roh Moo-hyun's administration. And since the beginning of the former President Park Geun-hye's administration, he has stood on the side of opposition. And so his political agenda, a platform rather, for this election is basically to reset the country back to what he used to serve during the Roh Moo-hyun's administration. He has been on the front line in the candle demonstration during the last few months. And I think he carries certain groups of strong supporter, kind of no matter what supporter. But on the opposite side of it is his limitation, that he has shown limited capacity to expand his supporters group. So I think in terms of his reputation, he's well known for his gentle and soft and kind personality. Again, at the same time, people criticize him for that softness, for being the leader and chief of staff, chief commander in case of any external and internal crisis.
Now, Ahn Cheol-soo of the centrist People's Party is a software mogul turned politician. Lately, he's been enjoying a dramatic rise in the polls. What do you think is behind this momentum?
Indeed, I think this is quite surprising for all the observers like me. And I think it requires a 30-second introduction about the background. That is that during these past 2 months of president impeachment and Park Geun-hye and the corruption represented by the Conservative Party, conservative people are dissatisfied with the conservative candidate. So they used to favor some alternative party from the liberal camp that is also Minju Party candidate, Ahn Hee-jung. But Ahn Hee-jung was just kicked out from the internal competition. So those voters, they still have to choose someone, but who is not completely leftist, so someone who is in the centrist. So I think Ahn Cheol-soo is gaining popularity by sucking in those votes left out from those Ahn Cheol-soo votes. So I think this is quite a dramatic rise, and in a sense that whether this will help him or not I think is something that we have to wait and see, because maybe his rise is too premature in a sense, because there is some backlashes he will expect, because now he is a very promising candidate. In terms of his background, he has a very interesting background. He used to be a businessman, a medical doctor,
yes.
and also a computer virus software programmer. So he has a really diverse spectrum of background. So this is his strength. But then, just like Trump in the United States, he doesn't have any political background. So he's a political novice. And also, he is known to be a good guy. But I think South Koreans need someone who is a commander-in-chief. So he used to be I know that, he has a reputation of being a good guy, but people have doubts about whether he can lead the country. So Ahn Cheol-soo also recently dramatically transformed into, I'm not Ahn Cheol-soo, I'm a strong Cheol-soo. So I think his transformation and competition with the Moon Jae-in is something that we have to wait and see.
Now, on the conservative side, we have Hong Joon-pyo of the Liberal Korea Party and Lee Seong-min of the splinter Padun Party. Unfortunately, amid widespread public discontent with the ousted Park Geun-hye administration, support for the conservative candidates is rather low. Now, the big question is whether we will see these two candidates join forces somewhere along the way.
Wow, that's $1 million question. There are people who wish for that unification. And there should be people who don't wish for that unification. I think it's important to remember, until a few months back, they used to sit on the same building and the same party under the same name. Going through this tumultuous period, I think the party has split into two. But the root probably is not too different. But they try to capture different groups. One, go back to the core, hardcore conservative group, Hong Joon-pyo in that case, and Yoo Seung-min tried to expand while maintaining the basis of conservatism and try to move into the middle ground. As all election goes for, those who capture middle ground tends to win the election. So I think he is trying to apply the strategy to that election. To answer your question whether these two candidates will unify, I think it depends on external factor. If both come to a realization that there's no chance of winning or even being close to winning, I think these two will unify. But if, for example, either Mr. Hong or Mr. Yu come up with the conclusion that I can run for a chance, even for slight, the chance of unification will be very, very low.
Well, even if they were to join forces, they'll suffer from a little bit of backlash, I think, criticism from the public, because they are from the same party that split into two, and to see them join back together for the sake of the presidential election, that's enough to draw public criticism, don't you think?
It is, indeed. But in terms of strategy, I think they've been applying very smart strategy. They need somebody to bash on for the wrong things that the general public has been very resentful about. At the same time, they want to maintain their political support. So splitting into two is such a smart strategy, because had they maintained the same name of political party and the same body, same building, I think the chance is gone for good. But the reason they're still fighting and being a contender is because they split.
So in addition to the four we mentioned, we have Shim Sang-jung of the minor left-wing Justice Party, the only female candidate in this race, and a former labor rights activist. Do you think she'll be able to pull a last-minute surprise?
Well, I think this is where the typical cliche applies, that is last but not least. She has popularity of support rate of 2 percentage points. But if we think that the Democratic presidency election is not just process of selecting one single president, but rather a process of representing diverse social different voices in society, I think we have to recognize her special place in this society. I think she represents this underprivileged constituency of a labor community. And if she, realistically speaking, she may not be the final winner, But I think the beauty of democracy is that we recognize her and her effort and the constituency, the underprivileged people that she represents in our society. And maybe the next president will hire her as a probably labor minister, because that is labor is area that she specializes in. And I think she has a very interesting background. After she graduated from the prestigious Seoul National University, she didn't get a well-paid job, but she went to factory and worked. Her specialty was working on sewing machine because she wanted to be part of this underprivileged community. But then I think that is also her limitation, because her focus is too narrow. In a way, a president should represent the entire country, different interest groups. So she has her own strength. At the same time, that is her own, her narrow focus is her own, I think, weakness as well.
Well, Northeast Asia is currently embroiled in a diplomatic tug-of-war. So no doubt, neighboring countries are keeping a close eye on who will become Korea's next president. What are some important diplomatic issues at stake, and where do the candidates stand?
Whoever wins the election after May 9th, the international foreign policy of this country will not differ too much, because the variables that the new administration can play with is so limited. And any common sense policymakers will soon realize that running a country is different from running an election.
Do you think it's because these agreements on THAAD deployment and the compensation for wartime sexual slavery, they were made between countries rather than individuals? Is that why it's going to be difficult for a new president to maneuver, to make a different maneuver?
Indeed, in the world of international diplomacy, to reverse what the previous administration has agreed is pretty much taboo, and it's kind of recipe to make yourself look very foolish and naive. So those things that are de facto set in stone will be extremely difficult to reverse, unless during the election, the general public has shown rather unanimous request for the new president, that no matter what was agreed during this previous administration, you shall change this. Then with that political momentum and manifesto, the candidate can sit down and try to renegotiate. But the chance is still not too high.
Yeah. Well, amid icy inter-Korean relations and North Korea's continued provocations, I'm sure national security is weighing heavily on voters' minds as well. What solutions are the candidates proposing to deal with North Korea and its nuclear threat?
I think Moon Jae-in is more like a carrot and stick guy. For example, if North Korea continues to develop nuclear weapons and enhance its lethal capability, then Moon Jae-in said that I have no other choice but to introduce deployment of that. But if North Korea behaves more responsibly, then we will reintroduce the industrial complex within North Korea. And I think that is Moon Jae-in's approach. Ahn Cheol-soo is more like, I think, a multilateral approach. We will, even concerning in regard to North Korea's belligerence, I think he wants to take a multilateral approach of, together with the international community to strengthen the international sanctions against North Korea. For Shim Sang-jung, the only female, I think she feels that, I think she is probably the most pro-engagement toward North Korea in terms of her political orientation. But in terms of methodology, I think she realized that whether it's a conservative approach or a liberal government, both governments' approach failed. So we need to have a unified parliament approach. We need to have lawmakers unite together and engage in a peace diplomacy. That is Shim Sang-jung's approach. The other two conservative candidates, I think they are more like a traditionally oriented. But then interesting thing is that they all support for the reintroduction of the tactical nuclear weapons back to the Korean Peninsula. So they are pro-nuclear weapons to protect South Korea against threats coming from North Korea. So these are some difference among them.
With heavy emphasis on Korea-US alliance.
Oh, right? Korea-US, that's a good point. I think Moon Jae-in respects South Korea's alliance with the United States, but then he also wants to have independence or slight. For example, we may be a junior partner of the United States, but we are not servant to the United States. Ahn Cheol-soo is more grounded in terms of his national security. His first starting point about in terms of thinking orientation about his national security is alliance with the United States is the most important thing, plus strengthening South Korea's own military capability, defense capability. Shim Sang-jung is more like a pro-engagement. We need to teach North Koreans, but sticks would not work. We have to engage North Korea. She is much more far left in a sense. And the other two, Lee Seong-min and also the other two, the two conservative candidates, they are very traditional pro-US alliance candidates. They also love to have, as I said, reintroduction of nuclear weapons back into South Korea.
I think US-Korea alliance is actually the case in point of similarity of the foreign policy. Yes, there's a spectrum of how do you see and what language and how you describe the importance of US-Korea alliance from, I don't know how you rank it, but there's a Shim Sang-jung candidate, and there's all the way they call conservative parties. However, no one actually denies the importance of US-Korea alliance. It's simply because there's no alternative at the moment. We do not have military capability to 100% deflect or defend the threat, potential threat from North Korea and around the region. So I don't think any deviation exists in that US-Korea alliance.
I agree.
I think the US-Korea alliance doesn't necessarily mean a kind of boss and servant relationship. It is a partnership.
Basically, the Korea-US alliance is important to Korea. It's just how the candidates say, or how much importance the candidates put.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, we're discussing where the 5 presidential hopefuls stand on foreign policy and national security. Earlier, we talked to some voters about what their hopes are for the next administration. Take a look.
A recent survey shows that 7 in 10 South Koreans are concerned about national security due to uncertainties, including provocations from North Korea. We took to the streets to hear what people want from the next administration in terms of security and diplomacy.
주변 국가의 영향을 받지 않고 소신 있는 정책을 밀고 나가길 바랍니다.
북한의 위협에 우리도 당당히 맞서야 된다고 생각합니다.
안전한 나라에서 살고 싶어요. 우리의 안보는 우리가 지켰으면 좋겠습니다. 적극적으로 바랍니다.
중국의 사드 보복에 대한 대안을 만들어야 하지 않을까요?
한일 위안부 합의한 거 있잖아요. 그걸 다시 해야 된다고 생각해요.
So basically, people on the streets express their opinions about the same issues that we've discussed so far. What are your thoughts after hearing from them?
I think the situation today is rather very, very unsettling. And to put some emotion into it, very unfortunate. I think people in this peninsula feel unsafe, probably more than ever in these weeks and months coming. And I think this should be the heart and core essence of our foreign policy of the new administration. How to secure physical and emotional safety of our people and our territory should be the most important objective of our foreign policy. Whether we partner with US, China, Russia, Japan, and all the rest of the other countries will be based on that calculation. The two advocates or two strategies I promote is the first, we need to have a strategy. To exaggerate a little bit, our foreign policy has been rather reactive, responsive to external changes, instead of having a medium and long-term strategies based on multiple scenarios. So when THAAD deployment is on the table, no one in the administration has a plan or strategy to deal with it. When China is responding this way, no one predicted or even forecasted or prepared a plan to manage. In the absence of medium and long-term strategy for national policies, we will have to go up and down in tumultuous situations in the next 5 years again. So the most important task of the new administration is bring all the smart and experienced mind together and prepare a national strategy based on multiple scenarios and create a national consensus that can go more than 5 years of one administration. The second, the geopolitical tension we face cannot be thought as a single factor. I think we need to bring national security with economy. So international geopolitical tension is best mitigated with geo-economic cooperation. So this is one of our strengths of our national policy. And this is one of the few cards we have to influence and to be in a position of driving rather than being on the second row and just be dizzy. Those who are in the driver's seat will not be dizzy.
Some of the voices that we just heard, people are asking questions such as, are we safe? Are we safe? So I think, and Professor Cho mentioned that it's not just physical security, but emotional security. For example, if I have a baby, is my baby safe? Does my baby have a future? Right? Does a job, the Korean Peninsula will be safe? Is there going to be a war? So I think national security will be continue to remain as a very important factor that people are continue to think about in the back of their head as a divided country. And here, as Professor Cho mentioned, a diplomatic shrewdness and intelligence to have a very shrewd diplomacy shuttling between particularly two powers, China and the United States, and having people who understand their languages and cultures and who are able to negotiate with them and have South Korea's national interest represented and being respected. I think this is a very important quality, whoever becomes the next president. And second, I think I just heard a lady who raised the question about comfort woman issue. I think the reason that people are asking and raising this question is that almost 70% of people think that we have to renegotiate some internal survey. Actually, the percentage goes up to 80%. And I think the way that former President Park Geun-hye handled it was because she hurried it too much in a very quick, hurried manner without asking the people's opinions, particularly the victims, the elderly women who were victims of the Japanese military, the mobilization to serve as sexual slaves. And I think democracy is a process of persuading people, asking people's opinions, and have their views reflected. This is a democracy. So I think one of the important things the future South Korean president asks is that before we're going to do this, we're going to do that, before we do that, I think we have to also ask questions about who are you, South Korea? I think South Korea's own identity and its fundamental identity is very important. We are a democracy. We respect human rights, free press, and free market economy. I think that is the defining characteristic of South Korea, and these are the values that we preserve, we want to keep. And I think it tells us who are our natural friends, share same values. At the same time, we also have to reach out other countries who don't necessarily share our values, but who also we could work together with. For example, China. China does not necessarily share the same all the values, but given North Korean importance of North Korean issue, we need to have a mature diplomacy that we should be able to work with China. This kind of a leadership is something that we badly need at this time.
The reason we watch U.S. elections so carefully is because we try to read the mind of people, because any elected leader shall represent the minds of the people. So I'm very sure, as you mentioned, that political leaders and general public in our neighboring countries is watching, not just the numbers of the poll on May 9th, but all the process. So one petition and suggestion is for all 5 contenders is try to come up with at least a few sets of consensus on our national foreign policies. So no matter who wins on May 9th, this shall be the position of the government. And that gives a strong enough legitimacy and justification for re-engagement.
I hope the contenders are listening to your
I hope
advice.
so.
Well, the presidential contenders are racing against time in this early presidential election, but it is up to us voters to review the policy pledges and make informed choices so that Korea can take the next step to becoming a more mature democracy. Well, thank you very much, Professor Cho and Dr. Lee, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you very much.
That's all for this week. Upfront will be back next week. Thanks for watching.